The Grand Army of the Republic was one of the most effective fighting forces the galaxy had ever seen. It needed to be, for in the Clone Wars, it faced an army that completely lacked mercy and self-preservation. An endless horde of battle droids content to keep shooting until either nothing shot back or they were destroyed. The CIS droid army was ruthless, and so were the Republic's clone troopers. They had what it took to beat the droid army, not just because of their superior skills, intelligence, and equipment, but because their battle doctrine was every bit as ruthless and lacking in self-preservation as the droid army's doctrine was. In this video, we'll be exploring that side of the GAR, the terrifying, suicidal elements of clone battle doctrine.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Kaminoans loved to talk about how their clones were superior to droid soldiers, but behind the scenes in Tipoca City, they didn't treat the clones much different from battle droids at all. The Kaminoans' praise of their clones' superiority shouldn't be seen as an affirmation of the humanity of their creation. They essentially saw their clones as living droids that were just better than proper battle droids, improved products instead of independent sentient beings. This way of thinking crept into the basic battle doctrines the Kaminoans wrote for the clones. Kaminoan strategists treated the clones as cogs in a great machine, the Grand Army of the Republic, and they imparted this thinking to the clones themselves. Though most clones would object angrily to being called living droids, on some level, they didn't see themselves all that differently. They had been indoctrinated for most of their lives to consider themselves pieces of a whole person after all, and that's not something you easily forget. The Kaminoans' mark on the clones was apparent long after they had left the training facilities on Kamino for the battlefields of the Clone Wars. In battle, the clones could easily match their droid opponents in ruthlessness, sometimes even advocating the killing of prisoners or civilians for tactical gain. But most disturbing of all, especially to the Jedi generals, was the clones' lack of regard for their own lives. It was expected that the droid armies of the CIS would charge into battle without concern for how many droids were destroyed or damaged, but the Jedi were horrified to learn that their own troops were inclined to act similarly. Most clones thought nothing of throwing away their lives to complete a mission, nor ordering their brothers to do so. The Jedi tried to quash this way of thinking, and in units like the 501st Legion, they succeeded, but this mindset remained prevalent in the GAR to the end of the war. Let's think back to a familiar phrase: good soldiers follow orders. Most of you associate that phrase with the inhibitor chips planted in the clones to force them to carry out Order 66, but it had far wider implications for the Grand Army as a whole. It was an idea the Kaminoans had spent a decade trying to drill into their clones' heads, the principle that lay at the heart of virtually everything they taught them, that nothing beyond the mission mattered. This idea was so pervasive in the GAR that even some clones who were usually thought of as more independent bought into it to some degree. Even the ARC troopers, who were far less indoctrinated than normal clones and were so independent the Kaminoans put them in suspended animation, shared this tunnel vision. Alpha 17, one of the first ARCs, was willing to murder innocents if he thought it tactically advantageous. In fact, it was the first thing he tried to do after being taken out of suspended animation. When he was first deployed during the first battle of Kamino, he found Tipoca City on the verge of capture by the CIS. Acting on standing orders from Jango Fett, he immediately set out to blow up the clones who were still in their growth jars, reasoning that either they grow up loyal to the Republic or they don't grow up at all. Only the direct orders of the Jedi generals accompanying him dissuaded him from obliterating millions of his own younger brothers. Later in the war, as the Republic was struggling to make headway in the Battle of Jabiim, Alpha repeatedly suggested the slaughter of all surviving Jabiimi political leaders and the imposition of martial law. General Kenobi repeatedly told him no, but Alpha kept suggesting it until Kenobi threatened to reassign him to fight in the Padawan's unit, which Alpha considered, quote, a fate worse than death. Then, there was the borderline suicidal lack of self-preservation many clones seemed to possess. During the Battle of Honaga, when faced with Nogri warriors who were trying to stop Republic forces from accessing an ancient Rakatan temple, Commander Bly ordered a clone squad to assume a defensive formation, which he described in an internal monologue in the following way. They knew the drill. Last man assumes a defensive position, provides cover fire for the rest of the team until he falls. Next man assumes the defensive position, and so on. As if that battle plan wasn't horrific enough, consider the fact that Bligh only had to tell his men to assume a defensive formation for them to understand that he was ordering them to kill themselves for the sake of the mission. Bligh, for his part, didn't think much of ordering his men to die, ending his internal monologue with the following justification. The mission is what's important. You do whatever it takes to accomplish the mission. Honoghr wasn't the only world on which clones carried out suicidal battle plans without a second thought. To provide another example, in the Battle of Brental 4, a clone trooper accompanying Shakti's infiltration team was tasked with sabotaging the Separatist base's shield generators. When he met resistance, however, he promptly overcharged his rifle and blew himself up to complete the mission without a second thought. It's not at all uncommon for soldiers to be indoctrinated to a point where they're willing to sacrifice their lives to complete their mission. What was different about the Grand Army was how thoroughly the Kaminoans devalued life in the minds of their clones. Unlike with most soldiers, the clones were in military training from the moment they were self-aware. Throughout the entirety of their early lives, every authority figure they knew taught them that their lives were meaningless. They had been given life for the sake of throwing it away for a republic they had never known, and the Kaminoans were explicit about this fact. Even the more empathetic Kaminoans who tried to sugarcoat it never shied away from the reality that many of the clones would die. To quote a saying the clone masters imparted to their trainees, "In water you are born, in fire you die. Your bodies seed the stars." What made the Grand Army of the Republic truly terrifying wasn't just that its clones were made to throw away their lives in a pointless meat grinder of a war that's hardly unique to the GAR after all. The horror lies in how the clones were indoctrinated into embracing their role as meat for the grinder, in how little they valued themselves. As we know, all the clones who died in the Clone Wars died for nothing. The Republic they were fighting for collapsed anyway. In a sense, it fell because of the clones. But this is even worse when you consider that most of those clones who died probably wouldn't have cared anyway. They'd been given orders, and they were programmed to follow them at any cost. As we know from Star Wars: The Clone Wars, many clones managed to become more independent, developing a greater sense of self-worth and a resentment toward commanding officers who treated them like living droids. This is most pronounced in the Battle of Umbara, in which the 501st Legion openly rebelled against the callous General Krell. But even on Umbara, among the clones of the 501st Legion, the same lack of self-preservation occasionally reared its head. After all, the spark of the 501st's rebellion was a borderline suicidal mission undertaken by a few zealous clones, one of whom ultimately killed himself aboard a Separatist battleship. Hardcase's death is presented as a heroic sacrifice, but let's not forget the reason he was willing to die: to complete the mission. Before the clones were willing to rebel to save themselves from a callous butcher, a few had to rebel for the sake of the mission and be wrongly punished for it. Remember kids, good soldiers think for themselves, and they always put sentient life before the mission. But what do you think? Had you thought of the clone army in this light before? Free to post your thoughts in the comments section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.